We are in this time of misinformation where they want people to be exhausted and uninformed. And I just think we cannot let that be the case. And it's incumbent upon us, when we think about kids' primary and secondary education in the United States of America, that our kids should graduate high school financially literate. The thing that's the biggest threat to capitalism right now is not Zohar Mamdani. It's crony capitalism. And now you have Donald Trump, who's not even like creeping on self-dealing and doing things that lack ethics. He is blowing right through the door and he's smiling while he's doing it. President Trump has a PhD in fake it till you make it. If Democrats are unwilling, it's like they're unwilling to sing happy birthday unless every kid in America has a cupcake. And that is just not a practical way to win. What Republicans are good at is selling the economy. And I think that's where sometimes Democrats make a mistake. They're so careful in wanting to be inclusive. They don't take the victory laps when they can.
Stephanie Ruhle, welcome to the People's Cabinet.
Thanks for having me.
You know, we talk at a very unique time in our society as well as in media. It feels like there's all kinds of information flying that, unlike in the past and unlike things that you take very seriously, are without sourcing, that people are getting all from their individual silos. So my first question to you, as someone who's been doing this a long time, how do we break out of those silos and establish some kind of objectivity information again?
I think the first answer is don't give up, because right now in this chaos-filled time, while there's a flood of misinformation, while there are bad actors that want to exhaust us, we can't let that happen, right? And so when you think about people talk about these dark times, and I'm not saying they're not, but all it takes is one light to drown out the dark. It doesn't matter how dark things are. It's one candle changes the whole landscape. And so for those of us who are at it, it's super tiring. It's exhausting. I definitely have many days where I'm like, God, wouldn't it be great to be covering movie premieres right now? And in some instances, I feel that way. But at the end of the day, I think it's a crucially important time. It's more important than ever because we've got news deserts in this country, because we've got entire regions in this country where people have limited access to information and news. And so it's crucially important to keep at it. And as much as I love anchoring my show at 11 p.m. Eastern every night, and I have a team dedicated to doing it, I can't believe, or I can't feel that, you know what, people are just going to keep watching there. So you have to create the best content that you can, knowing that what you do, the goal is to help people get better and smarter, and to not just do it on linear TV, to be doing it on social media platforms, to be doing podcasts, to be doing radio shows, to get to people where they are, because people are receiving their information from more places than ever. You know, it was Mark Zuckerberg, of all people, who like 5 or 6 years ago went on this walking tour of all 50 states. And his takeaway was, people don't trust information, they trust relationships. So they can get information from anywhere at this point. But if you've worked hard and over time built trusted relationships, honor that and find people where they are. If they're getting their information on social media, then I guess you're going to take your show and you're going to take the best content and you're going to make it in digital format to get your most important takeaways to that audience wherever they are. And I think it's crucially important. And I don't think that people, people want to believe that we're completely siloed, right? That we've created these divisions and we're monetizing these divisions. I actually do not believe we're as divided as one would lead you to believe. I think that for the most part, people are trying to take care of their families. They care about their neighbors, right? They want to be physically safe. They want to be socially free. They want to be financially secure. And it's our job to not just assume that people are tied to ideologies. People are tied to the fact that they want to live their best lives. They want to take care of their families. And if what we can do is provide information to help people do just that, and at the end of the day, after you produce this podcast, after I make my show and I watch it back and I say, did we create content that hopefully made people better and smarter? Then I think that's a win.
And how do you, can you take us through a typical day on how you put together the show? Because first of all, I don't know how all of you are able to stay up till 11 o'clock and stay lucid. I mean, it's somehow you're able to do it with an incredible amount of energy, and it's a big responsibility, right? And for many people who are watching live, it's the last information that they consume at the end of the day. I think a lot of people have seen your show, but I'm not sure many people know how you put it together. So maybe if you could take us behind the scenes a little bit.
I consider it an awesome responsibility and an honor, but yes, it is tiring. But I think it's important that it's at the end of the day. There was a survey years and years ago where the person who was considered one of the most trusted men in America was Johnny Carson. And it's not because he was just this great, great guy. He was the last person people saw at night. And when people watched him, they weren't in their office. They weren't in the dentist. They weren't in a dentist's office or an airport catching information as it went by. People were watching him at 11 o'clock at night when they were in their beds, when they were in their pajamas, when they were on their couches. And I try to take the show as this is the last information people are going to hear. What are all the most important things that happened today? How do we share that information with our audience? How do we tell them what happened and why it matters to them? And that's where the perspective part comes in, that we break down, here's the news, and then we bring on experts and analysts to explain why it matters. And sometimes that could mean that we're talking to lawmakers or we're doing an interview during the day and airing it at night. But oftentimes it's not. When you're on at 11 o'clock at night, you have the benefit of all the most important sound bites that happen during that day. And instead of having to have those lawmakers on who might filibuster the interview and blather on for 15 minutes, instead we could say, here's the 40 seconds of the most important thing they said, and here's why it matters. And we basically spend the entire day, my team works in shifts. We have our first meeting the day at 10:30, and just throughout the day, figuring out what's happening today. And for me, we obviously do things through a business lens. I do believe that economics is at the heart of everything. It was Kellyanne Conway who once said, people vote on what affects them, not offends them. And while we do get really worked up about things that are offensive or things that are abnormal or things that are unprecedented, at the end of the day, I do think people make some of their most important decisions based on their finances. And I think something that's really important, especially I come from Wall Street, and after I worked in finance, I worked in business television. I think something that's really unfortunate about people who speak in financial talk or even business TV, we're talking to ourselves. It's masturbatory. It is reporters speaking to an audience that already knows that language. And you have a huge portion of this country that doesn't understand finance. And then they just assume like, you know what? I'm not a money person. I don't understand it. And I just don't want to accept that outcome, because I know all of us, when we go to get a job, we want to get paid the most amount of money we can. We want to get the best rate on our mortgage. We want to make sure we're managing our lives so we can manage ourselves the best we can. And for me, if I can explain to people what's happening in what complicated economic, the complicated economic times we're living in, if I can break it down and explain it to people so they understand it and they can help make better decisions, to me, that is like the greatest win and an honor. During COVID, we spent a huge amount of time doing digital videos and on TV and doing call-in programs to try to help people understand how their stimulus checks worked, how unemployment worked, how the PPP loans worked. And sort of all the things that I've gotten to work on, in my tenure working as a journalist, I would say those were some of my greatest experiences. We did special programs sort of helping small businesses and individuals deal with complicated economic times during COVID. And it's amazing how many things at the end of the day go back to finance. And when you look at a lot of things with the current president, when you ask people, why are you voting for this person? Or what, you don't feel good about X or Y, oftentimes they say, well, it's about economics. And it's amazing because Republicans have done a brilliant job convincing the American people that they're the ones who are fiscally responsible. They're the ones who are pro-business. They're the ones who are responsible for greater, more robust economic growth. And historically speaking, that's not the case. What Republicans are doing, are good at, is selling the economy. And I think that's where sometimes Democrats make a mistake, in that they're so careful in wanting to be inclusive that they don't take the victory laps when they can, right? It's sort of like, I remember in the beginning of maybe a year into Joe Biden's presidency, I remember talking to somebody in his administration and just saying like, here's 5 great economic points that you guys, have and could be shouting from rooftops. Why aren't you? And one of them was the performance of the stock market. And the person said to me, like, no. Like, we definitely can't say that because not everybody's invested in the stock market. We don't want to exclude people. And I remember being mystified, like, yeah, I know not everybody's invested in the stock market, A. But B, it's not just Wall Street and hedge fund managers. The majority of people that own stocks and bonds are pension funds. It's firefighters, it's nurses, it's teachers, but that's neither here nor there. If Democrats are unwilling, it's like they're unwilling to sing happy birthday unless every kid in America has a cupcake. And that is just not a practical way to win. And if you've got a strong economic story to tell, and I get it, not everyone will be included in that win. There will be people left out and frustrated. I get that. But if you don't take your wins and figure out a way how to message them and communicate that and run your victory lap, then you're not going to have any wins to celebrate.
How much do you think this is just a failure of strategy versus the thing that you initially alluded to, which is I think a lot of people, including a lot of elected officials I talk to, seem to not have basic understanding of financial literacy. And because they're so worried about getting a question that they're not going to know the answer to, they shy away from it.
Yes, and yes. I think it's both. But I think that, listen, if there's, and I'm not saying emulate it, but I'm saying acknowledge it and learn from it. President Trump has a PhD in fake it till you make it. And again, I'm not saying to emulate it, but I do believe that shamelessness is his superpower, right? And I say this as a Catholic, because Catholics are just raised on shame where, 99% of the time we're just like too embarrassed or too ashamed to just like even put ourselves out there. But put yourself out there. And if you make a mistake, apologize for it, right? And then start over. But to shy away from talking about complicated and important things like finances and the economy is a huge mistake, because when you talk, in my opinion, to the majority of the American people, they don't care about politics. They feel like most politicians are crooked. And if they're not crooked, they're not doing anything for them, or they've given up on politics. But what they say is, I pay a lot of taxes and the government doesn't work for me. I don't like any of it. And they're very quick to equate, one party does this, well, the other party does that. None of them are any good. And if you don't cut through that and start to explain to the American people, no, this is what we're providing, this is what we're doing, and this is how the economy is better. It's not perfect, but here's what it looks like on the other side. I mean, look at the president's budget bill, right? Many of the crucially important programs that are getting cut are not going to get put into place. They're not going to kick in until after the midterms. So the majority of the American people won't even realize what's getting cut. So the Democrats have a messaging challenge right now. The Republicans are passing, we believe, what will be one of the most expensive pieces of legislation we have seen in years. So to me, they've given up their ability to claim that they're the fiscally responsible ones. They're the ones who want to go on about debt and deficits. And if Democrats cannot figure a way to message around this and educate the American people, well, then they've got a problem.
How do you think about independent media and how it's playing online media as well? The Midas Touch, Brian Tyler Cohen. It seems to me, at least leading up to this election in 2024, there was a little bit of a blind spot for Democrats. Some, as you said, some were doing podcasts, some were doing some of that. But if you just look at the pure data, the right has been way ahead of the left on this communication. Even now, when you see the White House, they are using new channels, rapid response channels, to push out their agenda, and it seems to get far more pickup than Democrats, even when they're trying to do, their typical X videos and things like that.
Honestly, I hear you. I would say two things. When people are aghast that the White House only now, is now flooding in these influencers that aren't journalists, and they're angry about it, I hear that. But if you remember the DNC last year, you were there. The DNC was flooded with influencers, right? Right. If you went to Chicago, they had all sorts of parties and events, and they were doing all those things. But what I do think that Democrats need to do a better job of is stop being so precious, right? Stop being so precious and holding yourself back from speaking ugly or uncomfortable truths. You know, it's sort of like that Real World MTV line where people stop being polite and start getting real. Like, it's incredible to me that you are seeing, right? Donald Trump was successful in winning over a lot of young male voters, which in 2016, I definitely never saw coming. In 2016, I'm like, how are Republicans going to win over young voters with what they're offering? And Donald Trump did it. What's amazing to me now, Turning Point USA, New York Times just did a big profile on it, just had their biggest conference for young females just a couple of months ago. And they're doing it through MAHA. They're doing it through, the Make America Healthy Again, organic eating, not having dyes in your food. And they're doing it through this movement of, it's a big positive to be trad wives. I think that there is some middle ground. If you're seeing a universe of voters that you would never in a million years would align themselves with conservative values, you have to find the places where there are, right? If suddenly people are saying, you know what, I don't necessarily feel great about processed foods, or I don't feel great about big pharma, right? There's a zillion things that are wrong with RFK Jr. But if he's pulling on a thread that is now connecting with voters that have traditionally voted Democrat, don't just assume that those voters are terrible. Figure out what is it that's connecting him to those voters, and how do you get there? Think about all of these women who are now aligning themselves with this trad wife idea. Maybe where the space is that in women, with all of our progress and all of the fantasticness of feminism, maybe we have forgotten to honor women who choose to stay at home. Maybe we have forgotten to see that voter and honor who they are and what they are. And so I just think, like, sometimes Democrats are so consumed and concerned with including everyone and being conscious of everyone, they're sort of missing the plot. But look at how Republicans have run the table on trans youth sports, which should not be a hot topic. It's something that impacts such a small amount of people, but they've allowed Republicans to run the table. I have 3 children that go to single-sex schools. So never in a million years should this topic be a hot topic. Yet when I go to sporting events, it's what I hear constantly. And so I just think Democrats need to figure out a way. How do you speak plainly? How do you say things sometimes that could be offensive to some and connect with people, right? I had the privilege of interviewing Vice President Harris during the campaign, and it was an honor to interview her. And I remember thinking after, what Donald Trump is great at, and oftentimes what he's spouting is a lie, but what he's great at doing is the soundbite. And you might say, this is bullshit, this is marketing, but so is getting elected. And I think sometimes when you're so careful about topics and you're so cerebral, when you're cerebral and you are up here, you don't get to people where they are, which is down there.
I feel like so much Democrats are just, because we see ourselves as the party of inclusion and civil rights, we oftentimes take that and therefore try to not take direct stances on anything at risk of offending a certain proportion of the party or the population. As a result, it just seems like we almost don't stand for anything, right? And I think, an example I think people are seeing straight up is, like, you talked about Wall Street and you talked about your work on it, and you spent 14 years on Wall Street. People see the stock trading. You've made allusions to this. Democrats saying that the financial system is rigged, but yet they still are trading stocks on, what is legal, but still many would say inside information. You saw what was happening with you exposed the identity of the JP Morgan whale, people, trading billions and billions of dollars unregulated. The people are still, many people are still bitter about GameStop and Robinhood back in 2021, where all of a sudden the buy button was removed, but the sell button was still enabled. Ted Cruz and AOC agreed that there needed to be justice, and then nothing happened, right?
Nothing ever happens. Okay. I mean, congressional stock trading to me is so out of control. Like there's almost, how many times have we seen, the likes of Abigail Spanberger and others try to put forward legislation to limit the way members of Congress are allowed to trade stocks, given the unbelievable inside information that they have, and poof, nothing ever happens, right? If we're talking about unfair advantages, like you've got the carried interest loophole, which is a giveaway for the private equity industry, and it never goes away, right? We're sitting here saying, why is Donald Trump allowed to do all the things that he's allowed to do? This is illegal. Here's the problem. It's not illegal. It's unprecedented. It's amoral. It shouldn't be happening. But lawmakers don't close those loops. And it's why so many people say, well, I don't trust anyone. And now you have Donald Trump, who's not even like creeping on self-dealing and doing things that lack ethics. He is blowing right through the door, and he's smiling while he's doing it.
I'm curious on your perspective on Zohran Mamdani, because in many ways he is embodying the kind of, the stances, especially from a financial perspective, right, and affordability. He has positions that many deem controversial, but he's not ashamed to say that it's too expensive to live in New York City. We need to freeze the rent. We need to figure out ways to make groceries more affordable. And to me, it's kind of funny to see, especially people on the right, but even people on the left, try to look at the affordability. I'm not talking about his other stances on Israel and all that. There's obviously a lot of controversy there.
Okay, but let me just say for a second, the answer isn't necessarily life's too damn expensive. Let's put a freeze on it. If you read the Abundance book, if you think about the abundance movement, let's take a look at regulation. Across this country, we have regulation that is strangling so many industries that stands in the way of progress, right? And this idea that like regulation is all good or all bad, the idea of regulation is to protect the individual. But sometimes regulation gets so tight. Sometimes there is so much red tape. Sometimes there is so much paperwork to get through. Progress doesn't happen. The thing that's stunning to me about Mamdani is obviously Wall Street, that's the industry that I came from, is devastated. It's up in arms that a Democratic socialist could potentially be the mayor of New York. I can say that every person that I cover is straight up freaking out over. What's more amazing to me is they're freaking out over a single individual who identifies with being a socialist Democrat, but he's a single individual who, if he were to be the mayor of this city, the most extreme aggressive things that he wants to do will be almost impossible for him to actually get done, because he got to get it through a city council. He's got to get it through a governor, right? Impossible. But these same voters who are also big donors, who aren't Trumpers, are panic-stricken over this guy destroying the future of our city. And I'm not opining on whether or not he will or his views on anything. But these same people are basically giving a pass and looking the other way when you have a president who is blowing through the rule of law, creating a trade war that is going to make life more expensive here, that is crushing businesses, that the trade war is the reason that the Fed Chair Jay Powell hasn't cut interest rates, which makes everything here more affordable. He's ignoring the rule of law, right? He's potentially making moves that will hurt the US dollar, right? The reason everybody invests in the US dollar, the reason other countries invest their money in the US, one of the main reasons is because they trust the rule of law, because we have three separate but equal branches of government. And if suddenly we don't, if suddenly we start behaving in an autocratic way or like a banana republic, people aren't going to invest their money here because they can't trust it. And it's amazing to me that these Wall Street investors who are setting their hair on fire over Mamdani, and I get it why they're not voting for him, but there's a difference between not voting for the guy and being absolutely paralyzed and panic-stricken over him. And these same people are like, oh, Trump talks a big game on the trade war. It's not really going to happen. That's what I don't understand. It's amazing to me because this is not about capitalism versus democratic capitalism. The thing that's the biggest threat to capitalism right now is not Zohran Mamdani. It's crony capitalism. And crony capital, right? Conscious capitalism is where we should be moving to. But the kind of capitalism that the president is employing right now is crony capitalism, right? The Treasury Secretary has met with all different business leaders, and I've spoken to many of them who've said when they make their case to him, when they say to the Treasury Secretary, sir, we get all of our parts from overseas, or we can't manufacture here. Those businesses don't exist in the United States. If we wanted to do it, it would take 10 or 20 years and trillions of dollars. The Treasury Secretary's answer is, you should go meet with the president. And you know what happens when you meet the president? He says, well, what do you have to offer me? Right? It wasn't me, but somebody said, the president's approach to trade is that of an outer borough mobster. You want to get something to the president? What's in it for him? And so it's amazing to me when you said to me, if you were to say to me, what does a Wall Street investor do for a living? The answer is they're a risk manager. They look at a business, they look at a country, they look at an environment, and they say, these are all the factors, right? Given all these factors, what are the risks associated? And can this business, can this venture make money? That's what they do. They assess risk. It's incredible to me that the Wall Street community will look at the president over and over and over and look at how he behaves and look at what he does and still say, maybe I'll get my way. And it's because they believe he's transactional. And in many ways he is, but in many ways, he's the same person he was in business. He agrees to a transaction. And then when it comes time to pay, whether you're his creditor or his contractor or his counterparty, he just doesn't pay. Don't believe me? Look at Elon Musk. Elon Musk gave the president, what was it, $300 million to help him get elected? I mean, even more valuable than the money was basically gave him Twitter, right, to spout and amplify every bit of information or misinformation he wanted. And now Elon Musk, who had unfettered access to DC and the federal government, has now left DC. And if there's anybody who's the most up in arms over the big, beautiful budget bill, it's Elon Musk. And what has Donald Trump's response been? Well, maybe Doge is about to come after you, sir. Maybe you'll get deported.
But isn't that...
So for everybody who's panicked over Mamdani, I get why you're upset over him, but why aren't you upset over what the president's doing?
But isn't that I think Elon's a good example of this, because Trump is now threatening his, $50 billion worth of subsidies or whatever that is in government. I think a lot of these powerful Wall Street people, you tell me, you'd know better, are worried about speaking out or pushing back either in private or publicly, because every one of these banks or every one of these companies have some government nexus that they don't want slapped or resulting in loss of capital as a result, right?
100%. And that is the case for the smallest businesses right now and the biggest businesses, right? Think about think about how we were supposed to approach mass deportations, right? It was hardened criminals. And now we're going to farms, we're going to construction sites, we're going to restaurants and hotels. People going to their jobs, going to fulfill jobs that the American people have chosen we don't want to do for a variety of reasons. If you think that right now a construction crew in southern Florida that was tarring a roof last week and have now either been round up and deported or they're hiding and not going to work, if you think that those construction crews have now been filled by a bunch of young American guys up on those roofs in 100-degree weather and 100% humidity, you're wrong. And the economic impact it's going to have on big businesses, small businesses, and our overall economy is huge. But you don't actually hear many businesses speak out. It's because they're afraid. They're afraid of retribution and retaliation. And the scariest thing is that fear is justified. The president will come for you.
So where do you think this ends? I mean, obviously, we're only 3 or 4 months into this administration, so it's scary for people to think it seems to be getting worse every day. He also seems to be, in many ways, wagging the dog or being like a matador and doing something to draw attention away from some of the more serious things that he continues to do. It's almost like the proverbial frog in the boiling pot, right? So how do people push back in this era where they feel powerless, where they're worried about retribution, where they have loved ones who they're worried about getting snatched up on the street, but are also just really concerned about their democracy going away?
I think it's crucially important to be informed and engaged right now. And I'm not saying people should take to the streets. I'm not saying they should fight. Just be informed and engaged. If you actually understand what's happening, then it's incumbent upon you to tell your friends and tell your family, because we are in this time of misinformation where they want people to be exhausted and uninformed. And I just think we cannot let that be the case. And how is this going to end? Like, again, I go back to money. If there's one thing that is proven-ish to be a guardrail for the president thus far, it is the bond market, right? When the bond market comes in and says, sir, like the US dollar is starting to crack, that's when the house of cards starts to fall. And I didn't obviously coin the term Trump always chickens out, taco, but you're seeing it. You're seeing it in trade, right? This deadline, that deadline. Now, here we are coming up on that, what is it, July 9th deadline. And it was a couple of weeks ago, Scott Bessent said, well, maybe that deadline isn't a hard deadline. Like if countries are having good faith negotiations with us or looking us in the eye, maybe that deadline won't be so hard. And the thing that I think has been so frustrating as it relates to trade, this administration is not being intellectually honest about how trade and trade deficits even work. And so that's why it's so hard for them to be a success. And the scary thing is, really small countries that don't have a great hand to play do fold to the president, right? If I'm a subcontractor in Queens and a big giant New York real estate developer wants to stiff me or wants to underpay me, I'll take what I can get. But you are now seeing some of our most important allies start to work around us and trade around us and not consider the United States the greatest and the best, most trusted ally. And that is worrisome.
And part of this goes back to your initial point around financial literacy, right? A lot of people don't even know what the term tariff is. He takes the term trade deficit. To your point, there are some countries where a trade deficit just makes a lot of logical sense for the United States, but he makes it as if, this is some kind of injustice. And because of the lack of financial literacy, people buy into it. Do you think there's some structure that needs to change in terms of the education of the American public? Because to me, it seems like, I have an MBA, so I know some of this, but I certainly don't know the extent that you do. And in many ways, the people on Wall Street take advantage of that information asymmetry to benefit themselves. It just seems to be a huge gap in our society that Trump is uniquely exploiting in a way that I think no other politician has in the past.
It's so funny. I remember last September, meeting with a CEO in his office and talking about President Trump versus Kamala Harris. And he's like, listen, I can't stand him, but I have to vote for him because I'm a business guy and he understands business. She's just a bureaucrat. 2 months into his administration, and this guy is a CEO and his company is largely here and in Canada. And this guy is now completely tangled in this tariff disaster. And I said, really? He understood business? You're now entangled in a trade war that isn't even rooted in truth. And the guy was just shaking his head and so frustrated and disappointed. Yeah, we need people to understand these things. They deserve to understand them, right? Every person, I go back to what I said before, wants to be financially secure, physically safe, and socially free. And it's incumbent upon us when we think about kids' primary and secondary education in the United States of America that our kids should graduate high school financially literate. Think about the subprime crisis that happened in 2008. Do you know why it happened? Because so many people don't understand the basics of how a mortgage works, right? Read The Big Short, watch the movie. And I don't necessarily blame those people, but you've got a mortgage broker, rolling up to your house saying, no, you don't need to just buy a $250,000 house. You can afford one that's $800,000. And let's get this 0% balloon, blah, 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 blah. And people said, yes, let me do this. And they got snookered. And that banker that snookered them has run away with the money because it was legal what he or she did. And that person's on the hook. And so I think it's crucially important that when we think about what are we educating our kids with when they're finishing high school, they should understand how the stock market works, how the bond market works. They should understand how leases and mortgages work, the basics of a checking account. And I think we're doing our kids an enormous disservice. And, after the financial crisis, there's lots of financial education programs around the country, and they're offered in some schools as electives. but they're not part of the core curriculum. And it's amazing to me when you think, I mean, I have kids in high school. When I think about the core requirements in high school, the kind of math that my sons have had to learn in high school, math that I cannot help them with come sophomore year, and none of it has to do with financial literacy. And I'm not dogging on trigonometry and calculus or physics and advanced chemistry. I think those are really great things if you work in specific industries. But if you're going to live in this world, being financially literate to me is far more important.
And again, yes, absolutely. And people feel manipulated because they don't understand it, and the president capitalizes on that manipulation. To your point about
hold on. Do you see how you already were dogging on yourself, where you said, I have an MBA, but I don't understand finances nearly as well as you do. There is something about financial markets. There's something about economics that we convince ourselves that the words and the language and the concepts are beyond us, right? You have an MBA, I don't, but you immediately think you understand it better than I do. And I just think, let's break that down. And this goes back to, it's different from Midas Touch, but this goes back to something I love that's happened on social media platforms. The amount of voices that are out there explaining finance and economics in a way that, I'm much older than you, but when you and I were in high school or college, your opportunities were the Financial Times, Barron's, or the Wall Street Journal. And that is like reading something in another language. So the fact that there is more access and more doors have been opened and just people have the opportunity to educate themselves, I think that's great. Unfortunately, they've gone so far that they're going, screw understanding traditional economics. I'm going crypto all the way. I mean, I think that's the unfortunate problem all the way over here. But people deserve to understand it. It's the basis of everything. It's one of the reasons I got into journalism. It was after the financial crisis. I remember thinking, my God, the banking industry has done the absolute worst job rebranding themselves, telling their story. Because while the financial industry is responsible for lots of wrongdoing, it's the banking system that finances the American dream. And American entrepreneurship is one of the greatest parts of our country and our culture. And I remember after the financial crisis feeling like we need to tell these stories and celebrate them, because in a post-08 world, in an Occupy Wall Street universe, the banking industry shied away, hid out, and realized like they were in trouble, so they were going to stop telling their stories. And what they needed to do was find a way to tell a better one.
Well, that leads me to my last two-part question around career and family. I think there's a lot of people, I admire the fact that you were 14 years in one industry and then decided to take a big bet on yourself and a leap into journalism. I think there are a lot of people who are really scared and say to themselves, I spent 10 years in an industry, 5 years in an industry. I don't want to give it up because I don't know about the unknown. But there's so many people I feel like are just not fulfilled in their careers and are struggling about how to take the leap and if they should and all that. And that leads to family, which is oftentimes that leads to insecurity with a family. You have an incredibly busy schedule, and you somehow are managing that with a family. So my final question to you is two-part. One, what's your message to someone who's sitting at a desk somewhere and maybe has spent a long time in a career and is thinking about trying to do something new and is scared to do it? And then two, how do you manage both career transitions and dual careers with a family? And my wife's a lawyer, I'm doing this. And I feel like there still isn't a model out there that feels easy to follow these days with two kids, especially.
I don't think there's any model. I don't think there's anyone who's saying, oh, I'm making it happen. I'm getting it done. It's great. It's super, super challenging. But I think the great part is, and this is for women and men, that we have all the opportunities that we have today. Right? When my mom was coming up, she didn't have the career opportunities that I have. She didn't have the education opportunities. There's no way she could have made the kind of money that I've made in my career. And I'm not saying that it's easy, but I'm saying one of the great things is we have lots of opportunities. And it doesn't mean you have to go for it and you have to choose this giant career, or you have to choose a high-paid industry. But I do think it's great that we can explore these industries. The second thing is, and this is very unpopular, especially for people who are just like excited and want to make a change, save your money. Right? So I almost left banking when I was 2 years in and I wanted to go to journalism school. And a mentor of mine said, do not leave. And banking is a high paid industry. And he said to me, you can do really well in a relatively short amount of time. Work hard, save your money, and then figure out what's next. I think oftentimes people get frustrated and they're saying, I want to make a change. And I'm saying, don't jump out the window. Save your money, get educated, get prepared, and take the stairs down. And the ugly truth that nobody likes to hear, when you've become a success in one industry and you want to switch to another, you have to take a giant pay cut. And I would say for every person that I talk to, like, I talked to tons of women who worked in finance who are like, I want to do that thing that you did. And then the conversation stops when I say, I took a 90% pay cut. And they're like, what? Did you say 9%? And I said, no, I took a 90% pay cut. And I'm not recommending that. I'm just saying that is the super ugly truth of it. And I, for a long time, saved my money. And I'm only half of the income in my house. So I'm saying this from a privileged position. I do have a partner. But I think that even for young people who are saying, I don't want to work for the man, I want to do my own thing, I think that's great. And I'm so impressed by young entrepreneurs. I was never one. But I just think before young people shun this idea of going to work for the man, I never questioned, am I going to go work for the man? It was, which man am I going to work for? I think there's great value in getting a great education and a higher education and spending a few years in training programs and learning and building and having that foundation. Because if you have a strong foundation and you know how to work hard and you know how to solve problems and you know how to build relationships, right? If you can work hard, if you're a problem solver, if you're a relationship builder, if you have those three things, you can apply those three things to every industry that's out there, right? Instead of just like, I don't like my boss or I don't like this thing that I'm doing. Tons of jobs suck. Tons of jobs, like you've got to grind, but you have to ask yourself, like, am I grinding with a goal in mind or am I grinding, going nowhere? And I think that working hard and building your skill set and saving your money is a great way that's going to give you more opportunities down the line. And I know that like saving money is the least sexy thing you can say to anyone, but in a scary way, when you think about the industries where women are harassed the most or oppressed the most or held back, it's industries that pay the least. It's people in marginalized communities who have to take a job where they're mistreated because they've got to make rent at the end of the month. And so if there's one piece of advice I would give to especially young people, as much as you possibly can, live within your means and save your money. Because money doesn't make you happy, but having money saved gives you the power and the ability to make more decisions. And I want that for people of every age.
My final question to you is, we started talking about the amount of misinformation out there, a lot of fear out there. I think people are still recovering from November of 2024. They feel disaffected by politics. There are people who voted for Donald Trump who I think are regretting their vote or just disoriented. And some people are just checking out altogether. So
some people are mad at Democrats. Some people are really mad at President Biden. There's a lot of people that are just angry.
So what's your advice to people who, listeners to this podcast, who are engaged in their communities, who know those people? What kind of message should you arm them with to get them engaged again?
Be patient and care more. I think I completely understand that people are overwhelmed and exhausted and frustrated, but the game is not over. And the idea that I'm going to shut out my family member or I'm going to give up on this person, I just don't believe on giving up on anybody. I don't actually believe that people are bad. I think that people are faced with unfortunate circumstances, and I think people make bad decisions, and then things spiral on top of one another. But, one thing that I would say I learned during COVID about all the amazing, neighbors you had that you didn't know, And there's so many people in your community that, you didn't give the time of day to, or you knew nothing about them. And then suddenly when you needed each other during COVID, because you didn't have any toilet paper, you got to know one another a lot more. And so right now, the people who are listening are engaged and they care. And I want people to care more. I just go back to be informed, be engaged. Don't be frustrated with people who disagree with you. Connect with them. Because at the end of the day, I do not believe that we're that different. And oftentimes people who are super angry and disconnected, that disconnect happened because of one unfortunate experience and then misinformation and then more misinformation. And we live in this silo that the social media algorithm that is making more money than you could possibly imagine knows what frustrates us and just feeds us more poison to get us angrier and angrier. Let's make a decision to be the antidote to that.
Stephanie Ruhle, host of the 11th Hour. Stephanie Ruhle, you now know how much work goes into this, everyone. Tune in every night. It'll be well worth your time. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Appreciate it. We hope you enjoyed this episode of The People's Cabinet. If you did, please like, subscribe, ring that bell, and put in the comments below who else you'd like to see sworn in. And stay tuned for new episodes every Tuesday. Let's go.